Welcome to 52 Weeks of Hope, Jon.
Thank you, Lauren. Good to be here. Am I incredible?
Yeah,
You said
definitely.
incredible. Feels good. What
Yeah.
week are we in of hope? Are we in like week 3?
I don't know.
No, we're still in 2.
Oh, we are. Yes.
Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
It's lucky.
Yeah. I mean, it depends when you start counting because some people count by the sun and the moon and but we won't even go into that. So you have an upcoming book, Anxiety Hacks for an Uncertain World, or it already came out, or is it a release?
It was released like 3 weeks ago.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
I can see it. Anxiety Hacks for an Uncertain World.
Yes, that's the paperback version, and there's a hardcover version, which is a lot more expensive. It's actually a textbook as well as a general trade book and a clinician's kind of supplemental guide for patients as well. And it's the first self-help humor book on mental health, especially for academia. It was extensively peer-reviewed, so it's not just stories of me train wrecking my life. It's evidence-based clinical tactics that I've stripped out each chapter is a trigger essentially. So there's 22 chapters, and each chapter is like divorce, breakup, pandemic, job loss, any of the big adverse events, moving, that sort of thing that you can think of. And then there's the second half of each chapter is those tactics to implement on the fly, which is the difference of this book than others. There's no workbooks, worksheets. The last thing you want to do when you're in the perils of some anxiety triggering event is to have to do homework. So I've taken that out and made things very palatable for people.
Let me grab my book. Wait, what chapter was
it? It's a triage guide. It really is. Each chapter you could really transpose the tactics and techniques from any chapter to any adverse event, or you can read it straight through. You don't have to say, I was just bitten by a snake. What do I do? What chapter is that? You could just open it up to any tactics and, distress tolerance. Okay, I've got to calm down, that sort of thing. So you could either read it straight through and glean as many tactics as you want and use those when something, adverse arises, or you can refer back to it. So
I like anything solution based. Instead of hearing everything that's wrong with me, I want to know, okay, well, what do I do? How do I get out of this?
Yeah,
I just froze and I don't know what's happening right now and don't see anything. I'm always curious about guys, like what happens with them? Is it any different or you don't know? And
it's different in that I think, like we'll take breakups and divorce, for example, because that's a biggie. And most of us go through that at least once in our lives. And women tend to deal with those on the front end. So by the time a man deals with the breakup or divorce, a woman is already over it, because she's not only did she see it coming, generally men ignore those red flags along the way, and then they're dumbfounded when it happens. But men tend to deny, distract, and we're going to strip clubs while you're going out with your friends and having conversations about how not to repeat that mistake. And so we're on the back end dealing with it. And then we want that person back, and that ship has sailed. That's typically the way it has gone down. And interestingly, that's what started all of my writing. Was I went through a breakup and I didn't know what to do with it. And I had just gone through like my 10th shoulder surgery. I had 13 orthopedic surgeries from sports. I was in a sling and I was trying to tie my shoe, and I just got dumped, and I just started crying on the linoleum. I couldn't process all of the adversity that was going on or tie my shoes. And I'm like, okay, well, I could get Velcro shoes. How do I fix my heart, and move forward? And I started journaling, and I started to see the humor, not immediately, it took a while, but I started to see these humor patterns in all the dysfunction of not just a breakup, but there's a pattern of humor that really streams through anxiety. And if you can recognize that and tap into it, it shifts your perspective and gives you the hope for a different outcome. And that's what I write about, is to source that humor, pause for a moment. And I didn't invent the clinical efficacy of humor in mental health or physical health. This goes way back to greater minds than mine. Norman Cousins, Viktor Frankl, for example, these folks who have lost everything, and they've written about that tiny, tiny light at the end of humor and how to channel it and shift perspective towards hope. And that's what humor does, is it stops it. It stops the whoa, it stops the boo voice long enough to where you could be like, maybe I can flip the script here a little bit and get something better out of this. So the breakup thing is what started it. I wrote an essay about it called Breaking Up Badly. And it was noticed by a movie producer in LA who wanted to do a movie and asked me for a script. And I'm like, a screenplay. And I was like, what? Who are you? And I actually flew down to Hollywood, got my first agent and entertainment attorney who robbed me blind. I wrote the book, but it wasn't picked up. But what did catch the attention of the publisher was the voice, that kind of self-deprecating humor. And they wanted me to write a book for teens on anxiety. And I was like, well, I'm an anxious adult. I was an anxious teen. It's not a stretch. And so I wrote 101 Ways to Conquer Teen Anxiety. And that's really what started it all. And it's just kind of taken a life of its own. They then wanted a second teen book, which comes out in July. And then this adult book, which just came out last month. So, I just want to write my magnum opus, as long as these other opportunities keep coming up, I'll keep writing them.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because the comedians I know are like the most depressed people I know too. Yeah, and very broken. If you ever listen to a bunch of comedians talking on any of these, where they're just discussing, having these open conversations with each other, they're very funny and they're very dark.
There's a lot to that. And if you Google, and I talk about this in the book, if you Google celebrities with mental illness or celebrities with anxiety, celebrities with depression, it's pretty much everybody that you've ever heard of. And comedians, musicians, writers, artists, it's a double-edged sword because the creativity comes from the coping that we use to get through these other things. So, would I trade all of the adversity and give up the writing? It's a big question. It's a philosophical.
Nobody has to ask you. You don't. Luckily, you're not being asked that question.
Yeah. At some point, I would have, but now I'm like, no, it's kind of working out.
Yeah. Well, to me, journaling and meditation I was just asked. I've put together a clarity and confidence scorecard, actually, and I was asked, well, what are the two biggest or best tools? I don't know what the right adjective is, but I said journaling. It's a no-brainer. Journaling and meditation are hands down the best tools for both of those.
Totally agree. My fear is that somebody will find my journals after I die.
No, I have a plan. Are you kidding? I have a plan. My friend, she knows, get all of my writings out.
Yeah, that's a good
burning
plan.
Is bad for the environment, but nothing is to be found.
Yeah, there's some scandalous stuff in there, I'm sure. Yours and mine.
It's just nobody should ever see that. That's the free flow. I need peace in mind. That stuff should be gone.
Yeah. I look back at some of mine and I'm like, man, that was a dark time. What did
Everyone goes through it. Nobody goes through this life unscathed. I've talked to enough people just the last couple of years doing this, and even before that, it's amazing. The only way through is through.
Yep.
If there was a way to jump first, go around it or anything, I'd have found it. That's it. So what are some tools that we can use to deal with anxiety when it arises? Because, sometimes I was taught if it's hysterical, it's historical. If I'm having some overreaction to a situation, it's not the situation. It's triggering me somehow. And I don't need to know why, or in the moment. Something's going on, but how do I get through it at that time?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Did that question make sense?
Yeah, it's mastery over emotions. I mean, essentially, it's our response to things, which is why exposure response prevention, which is one of the methodologies I talk about. I strip all the acronyms out in the book. I don't even mention that. It might be mentioned, but I really just work on, okay, what do you do with this? And by way of example, if you're afraid of driving on the freeway, well, you get on the freeway in a car. With OCD tendencies, for example, avoidance is only going to exacerbate the problem. So it depends on your anxiety, but there's, anxiety first and foremost is we need it. It's how we survived. It's why we're here today. It's how we pay the bills. It's, really how I showed up on time to talk to you today. We need it in a small amount, right? It keeps us alive. It's when it becomes chronic, after it goes past a few months and it starts becoming debilitating and interfering with life, that is where the issue comes. And so that's the anxiety I talk about. And there's buckets of anxiety. And, there's generalized anxiety disorder. OCD used to be part of that, but now it's in its own category according to the DSM-5. But you've got, social phobias, you've got PTSD, which is really in its own category now. And so there's these different buckets or categories, which I have in the book. And then you have the different kind of anxieties that might fall under those. And generalized anxiety is really the catch-all. And so depending on your anxiety and your fear, there's different approaches to alleviating it. Just waking up anxious each day, adding caffeine to the mix, well, that's kerosene on a fire. And, caffeine is a quick one. Alcohol is another one. You can have a panic attack, and panic disorder is one of the other categories, but you can have a panic attack just from alcohol. If you drink enough alcohol. I know this firsthand. I've had one. I was hugging a parking meter downtown in my college town, having one of the worst panic attacks I've ever had, solely induced by alcohol. I know better, but I like to, road test everything I talk about. Actually, during the writing of the book, I have an illustrator and a contributing author. My contributing author is Dr. Christopher Willard, who is a lecturer at Harvard as well. And my illustrator, Peter Brown, all of us were going through some crazy stuff at the writing of this book. Chris lost his mother to cancer. My mother was diagnosed with a stage 4 terminal breast cancer. I'm in cancer remission. Peter lost his father. All three of us went through a big geographical move. We were just like, all right, is it us? Is it this trio of just doom? Do we break up? Or is it just like this book's taking too long? We've been writing it for years, which was actually the case. If you give anyone enough time in life, you're going to have the good and the bad. And, there's a saying that I say this, but life's unfair for all of us, which is what makes it fair for any of us. And, there is no category of bad things happening in threes or any certain number. That's humans wanting to control things, right? So you could have a million great things happen and then a million bad things, or you could have one and one. There is no ratio. But a lot of these things that we had to implement as we were writing this book, these tactics. And so the book is a testament to the things that we were going through at the time of writing. And we talk about a lot of those things. And we follow up with the tactic. And that's where Dr. Willard's stuff is really helpful is, what do you do now if you're in the throes of job loss and maybe you're got a divorce on top of it? How do you even function? And so I talk about radical acceptance and these distress tolerance skills and 4x4 breathing. And you're big on the meditative breathing. There's I like alternate nostril breathing, which is really a cool technique. I'll do it while I'm driving a lot when I'm stressed out on the road and it looks like I'm picking my nose, but I'm actually just plugging a nostril. I do straw breathing. I'll try to drink through a coffee straw. So depending on the situation and the severity of the anxiety in the moment, there are many different tactics. And I talk about, SSRIs and medication versus talk therapy. And, I believe there's a time and place for medication. Absolutely. Talk therapy cannot be substituted. Right now we're having all this AI discussion and there's AI bots doing therapy, which is scary.
Yeah.
There was a company, I won't name it, but it recently trialed their AI chatbots without telling the patients. And
Wow.
Yeah, it was empathetic. It actually did really well. The patients couldn't tell, but when they found out, they were pissed off and they didn't want to deal with it anymore or talk to the bot.
I just tested on new California laws, a couple of new employment laws, and it wrote a whole thing on independent contractors versus employees that went into effect a couple of years ago. Completely messed up. So,
like the gig laws and stuff.
Yeah, and it was correct on the law, but it wasn't new. I'm like, no, that's not a new law. I know what new laws went into effect in this state for 2023. And I was like, oh, maybe it'll write a better blog post than me. Now, when I did it on some of the topics that I used for the podcast, it wrote great blog posts. But then I tried it for my legal practice because I'm a lawyer also. You might not know that. But anyway, It was completely off.
Interesting. I thought I would be safe because I'm like, well, AI will never be able to demonstrate empathy and, but it can't. But we still want that human connection and we want the flaws.
So that was actually, it was good because as you were talking, I was like, okay, so one of the big things right now is isolation. And you can feel like, oh, I have connection. I'm meeting you. I feel connected to you. It's not the same as being physically together. It's not. Yeah. And I'm as much a culprit of this now that I work from home. I'm like, no, I've seen all these people. I've been online, my office.
Mailman.
Yeah. And it's not the same. And it's very hard to get people who are isolated, their cure for isolation is more isolation. It's really hard to get people out. Then when it's time to actually be at a party, and I say party in quotes, I use air quotes, and to get them to go out. Now it's not a high, or maybe it is a high level of anxiety, but it's like, I don't want to go. Nobody will notice if I don't go. Your head starts talking, and it can go either direction from there. Oh, nobody will notice. But it's so important to our mental health to show up. First of all, it's important to have the other people there. It's not even just about you. If everyone doesn't show, the person who's put all the work and time into whatever the thing is, and it's important to all the people there that are other people are there, and it's important to you and your mental health that you show up. I was taught.
Plus, there's snacks, right? I mean,
yeah,
usually,
of course, there's food, something other than what's in your pantry. So yes,
I get it. I'm guilty of this as well. I work from home, and yesterday I think was my first time out because we've been under this torrential rain for weeks currently, as you know. And I was like, the sun came out, and I knew I needed that vitamin D because it's real. I'm like, you get that kind of, you need sun, you need vitamin D. It actually boosts your immunity, it boosts your mood. I mean, it's clinical. But I had to try the pistachio latte at Starbucks, and I, the first person I saw, the first human I interacted with was the barista, and I was like, hey, how you doing? Oh my God, it's so good to see you. And the guy probably thought I was crazy, but he didn't know that, here he had seen, 500 people already. And he was the first human that I had seen all day. And so I talk a lot about not just loneliness, but male loneliness, because it's an epidemic in and of itself.
Yes.
Let alone, I talk about manxiety, which is male anxiety, which is different than other genders, and how we handle it is different. And it is hard. Men tend to silo quite a bit. We tend to rely on our partners for all of our social interaction more. And if you've seen the Saturday Night Live skit, Man Park, it just nails it. It's fantastic. I recommend anybody to Google Man Park SNL. We're all guilty of that for men. And even though I talk a lot about this, but I'm guilty of it myself. I will make excuses why I can't meet with somebody. I've had perfect opportunities to hang out with a guy and then I don't. For men, there's also the vulnerability of our egos and being perceived a certain way. Like, how do you ask another man out, and it's really, it becomes a very awkward dance because we don't want to be misread and we're idiots. All of these different tactics for every one of these situations. And I think I've definitely addressed everything we've talked about in the book, but I don't want to give away all the tactics because then nobody will buy my book. I do want to stress that they are interchangeable tactics for any anxiety that you're suffering. And for AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a saying that, you're triggered to drink if you experience any of the HALT symptoms. So hungry, angry, lonely, tired. It's similar with anxiety. So if you isolate, that's a trigger, the alcohol, the caffeine. If you're not working out, exercise is getting more and more publicity now as because it generates a protein called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotropic factor. It's a protein that literally causes a change in the brain. And don't ask me the clinical speak on it, but it boosts mood and lifts depression. And it's a great anti-anxiety tactic. So it actually beats medication. So, these are easy to do. Take a walk. Looking at trees will shift and alleviate anxiety. And I mean, just out your window, trees are awesome. All of ours are falling down right now with the floods and mudslides, but we have some trees left. So I'm looking at them. Yeah, there's a lot of good nuggets in there.
Yeah, no, there definitely are. And talking to people, there's I did a episode a few weeks ago on with Maria Franco. She's a professor at University of Maryland who wrote a book it's all about friendships as adults and how difficult it is and how different. And I mean, I stalked her a little bit to get her to talk, and because she's so good, and it's so interesting, and how we have to put ourselves out there, and it takes work. It just does. So
there's that meme, like adult friendships is two people saying we should get together until you die. and never actually meeting up. And it's true. You run into somebody, and it's like, oh, we should totally get together. And then you just keep saying that every 4 or 5 years. And then you go back to your day to day. I mean, we're under so many pressures right now, let alone pre-pandemic. I say pre, it seems like it's never ending. But, now with, parents had to homeschool for so long, and, with work and inflation, and, I don't need to share all the stressors with you, but friendships take a back seat to all of that. And unfortunately, at the toll of our mental health and physical health, because they're intertwined. There's a lot of studies showing that, what anxiety and depression long-term can lead to in terms of physical ailments.
Yeah, definitely. But we have to feel our feelings, because if we don't feel them, that comes out as some form of trauma in our bodies and systems too. So yeah,
you have great nuggets.
All of it. You have to do all of it. And I've prioritized walking with friends, and because of all the torrential rains, those are like my non-negotiable.
Oh, you kayak down the street with friends.
And now it's been weeks since I've gone and seen anybody or walked with a friend. But I know we need it. I can't complain about the rain, because we've been in a drought, but whatever. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to say is, one of my first interviews on this podcast was Evan Mark Katz. He's a coach for relationships and everything else. And he was telling women, give the guys a break. These single men, they don't talk to anyone. They're isolated. So the fact they maybe want to marry you on the second date, they've been isolated where they don't have girlfriends. And it's only because I asked him, I go, so how's it with your guys, your crew? And he goes, I don't have a crew. I talk to my wife. She has that group or book group or that. I have no one. So then he went on a whole diatribe about that. Give guys a break. And it got a little bit dark and everything. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, we have to give ourselves a break. Yeah, I don't know what it is, because I'm guilty of it too. And it's like, I'll literally have people ask me to go do things, and I'm like, how do I get out of this? Or I'll commit, and knowing that I'm going to bail, before the actual event. Yeah, I don't know. And then I complain that I'm lonely.
That's not a gender thing. That's an individual thing. Some people are like, yeah, let's go.
Well, at first it was forced upon us, right? And social distancing, like we had to do it. And we're like, no. And then I think now we're like,
Yeah, it's so true.
I mean, I just like texting, and I hate talking on the phone, unless I'm driving. Yeah, I have to force myself out, just as you said. I have to do it myself. And being a writer is a isolative career, and it lends to isolation. And so, it's all the more excuse for me. And I always say, I don't need real friends. I have readers, they're friends by proxy. They're reading my stuff. So it's my tribe. But that's not good for me either. So I am making a conscious effort. One of the things I talked about, the easiest way to make new friends is to reconnect with old friends. That's one of the things that I not only preach, but I'm practicing myself. And I've literally reached out to a few friends from decades ago that I lost touch with over, trivialities. And it's been great, talking with them and being supportive of one of them. I hadn't talked to him. He was my best friend for 20 years. And we just had I didn't like the woman he married, to be honest. It was his second marriage. And I'm like, yeah. So I just was like, I don't know, I'm just going to let this friendship fall by the wayside. But then I really missed him. And I went on Facebook and saw that he lost his son recently, a few months ago. And I'm like, holy Sleeto, and I could watch the funeral, video, and I watched it. And I grew up with this kid and watched his son grow up, and it was devastating. And I reached out to him and was like, I'm so sorry I wasn't there, and let's get together. And, there's pivotal moments and regret that I have in missing some of these things. And, there's so many cliches, like we don't know if we have tomorrow, or, tomorrow's not promised, and today's a gift. That's why it's called the present. I hate these things, right? But it's so true. You've been through a lot. I was diagnosed with cancer on my birthday, a smoker's cancer. I've been an athlete my whole life. My mom as well. I'm adopted, so it's not genetic. So there's been a lot. I've had all these surgeries from sports. I don't know why we just live as if we're all going to, like we're all promised 100 years or even 80. I know more than a lot of people that, you could pee blood on your birthday, not to get graphic, but that's, what happened. And that's eye-opening. And you think, I'm going to live differently after this, and then, you go through chemo and surgery and you go through all this, you get into remission and then you just go right back to, I got 100 more years. So I actually have to remind myself, because I think perspective is a beautiful thing. And, having perspective, and we don't all get it. But when you have it, you got to cherish that and say, look, I've gotten this. I've seen the other side. I know how things can get. I've got to live completely differently. But I think when you get away, when you get some distance from the perspective, from that perspective driving event, you kind of settle back. And that's just human nature, that we settle back into our norm and our old patterns. And so, yeah, I share that because I'm guilty of it, as anybody else is. I wish I wasn't, but it is the truth.
That's where gratitude lists come in handy. Doing a gratitude
list is 3 a day. That's what I say.
Yeah.
3 gratitudes a day at the end of the day. It could be a sunset. It could be somebody greeting you or holding the door open for you. Yeah. No matter how small.
Yeah. Definitely. So what's the hardest challenge you've ever gone through? How'd you get through it?
Oh, that's a great question. You blindsided me, Lauren. I'd say the hardest has been my own anxiety and depression, because it's been lifelong. It probably started at 13. I was a cutter, and I started cutting. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I had all these thoughts that didn't make sense, suicidal ideations. I just wasn't wired like other people, and I knew that. And I was a little league pitcher at the time, I remember, and I was having what was diagnosed as asthma, because anxiety wasn't a thing yet, wasn't cool yet. I was having anxiety attacks on the pitcher's mound, and no one knew that. They thought, here's an inhaler. It's like, well, that actually makes it worse. It's got ephedrine in it, so it's just spiking my anxiety. And so I had all these worries, and I was like a existentialist at the time. I remember I was like always laying in bed thinking, what if we were never born? And what makes our soul our soul? Why am I not a rabbit? And, all of these crazy things that I would think about, and no kid should be thinking about these things. I should be playing with my G.I. Joe. But I had to learn through, fortunately, my parents kind of recognized, okay, she's got a lot of cuts on him. There's something going on. And I would lie and say it was from our cat. It was clearly not the pattern of a claw. And that's a true story. I did tell them that. So, I ended up in therapy. I ended up on medication, but it's been a lifelong process. And that's been the hardest thing I've ever had to really deal with. And that's my hope. And, no matter what you're going through, there are people, and I don't compare my woes to your woes. It doesn't matter what you are going through or what I'm going through. It's what you're experiencing, what and what feels terrible to you. And that's yours, and you own that. Doesn't matter if I'm experiencing something worse or even not as bad. You're carrying what you have, and that is what you have to contend with, and you have to play those cards. And so, I really wasn't successful until I started accepting that and being okay with it, and not trying to hide that I'm a guy and I'm depressed. And people just didn't know what was wrong with me. I was flaky, or I was moody, or I was a jerk, but that wasn't really it. I was depressed. I was anxious. I had these other things, and I would label it anything other than a mental disorder. And, growing up, that was way more stigmatized than it is now. And
look, even the football players are like, I have it.
Right.
I mean, it's almost a badge. It's like, oh, I have mental,
Well, if you don't have anxiety, you're not living. And if you don't have chronic anxiety, you're not like living hard. It's.
I just finding out right this second. Wait, every kid doesn't think what would happen if I wasn't born, or was it? I'm not kidding you. Like, I'm like, wait, everyone does. Every kid doesn't think that. Like, I don't.
Yeah, I had some deep thoughts, I tell you. So, I had to not only accept and become vulnerable as a man. I had to, and that's how this started is, years and years ago, I started writing out those vulnerabilities and the humor in it. And then I noticed that other guys would open their kimono and be like, hey, look, I got it too, and it's like, yeah, you do. And we all do. It's okay. Come out of the woods, join me in this kumbaya. And it's pervasive. Any guy that tells you he doesn't get depressed, or, you'll see guys doing other things like over athleticism, or, having 13 surgeries or drinking or doing drugs or doing a lot of cannabis, which, by the way, isn't the end all for mental disorders. I did a lot of cannabis to try to deal with anxiety, and it actually made it way worse, as well as the depression. So, there's been a lot of trial and error in my life. But the one thing that really saved me was writing, was channeling it all into an energy and force for good. And that's what I've done through the writing, through the books, because I noticed that other guys could relate to it. So maybe other people I don't know could relate to it. And then I started writing stuff, and I couldn't believe the emails and the chatter I was getting from other, not just men, but women, girls. I wrote for first magazine article I did was for a teen girl magazine. And, I was like, holy Toledo, we're all in this, right? We're all in this together. And let's be who we are, and let's be flawed, and let's be vulnerable. And that's what people relate to.
Absolutely. I haven't thought of a nice way to do this, but like, just be vulnerable, be yourself, be authentic, tell others what's going on, because nobody's paying that much attention. Nobody.
Oh yeah.
Nobody. I was like, oh, when I started this, and I would tell my story in the first episode, I did a perfunctory kind of like nothing, and I knew it was that, and I was like, and I just let it rip, whatever. And nobody cares. Nobody cares if they maybe blink for a second and then move on, but nobody's paying attention. And that's what I learned. So then I'm like, okay. And that's what I want to tell people, is like, nobody cares. And I don't mean that in a mean way. Nobody's paying attention. If they do, it's for a blink, and then they're paying attention to themselves again. They're just like thinking about themselves. So you could talk about whatever you want, because it's important to.
And everybody's got their own stuff.
Yep.
And so, in closing, related to what you just asked, is I had to then lastly source my why. And my why was, I'm going to take all of this crap and I'm going to turn it into something positive. I really just took in every cloud, there's a silver lining crap. And I turned it into my own mantra, and which was, I'm going to laugh at my adversity, and I'm going to package it for other people so they can do it. And no matter what they're going through. And so Anxiety Hacks for an Uncertain World is actually a book series. I have 22 more chapters for the next book, and there's probably 22 after that. And if you turn on the news on any given day, you're going to get more, because every day it seems to be something else that we're supposed to worry about. As you know, in California, it's now gas stoves. We're dying from benzene from gas stoves. I mean, it's always something if you turn on the news, or, if you don't
watch less news. I mean,
I talk about that too. Limit your media exposure.
That was one of my lessons for 2022. Like, and I like cringe to actually say it out loud, that for me to read some actual physical paper every day. And I mean, I have to, for my law practice, consume a certain amount, but I watch very little news anymore.
Good. Yeah. Bravo. No, it's huge. It definitely, that's one of the quickest way to boost your mood. Take a media sabbatical. And if you have to limit, if you're finding that you're vulnerable to, on social media and things are, because I certainly am. If I can't tell you every day, if I look at social media, I look at something that pisses me off, and I'm like, why am I reading this? And
it's also a time suck.
Yeah, it certainly is. So take a sabbatical, go analog. We don't need to be in the digital age all hour of every day. Go analog, go offline. Offline is peace of mind, I tell people. And so, these are all things I discuss in the book and try to share and impart with people, and find your why. And if that means you're the best fireman out there, you're the best lawyer out there, you're the best mom or dad or aunt or uncle or artist, sculptor, etc., channel that. Because we need each other's talents. We need each other's outputs. And that's what makes us a cohesive society. And that's what's going to sustain us.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that's great. Do you have a message of hope you want to give?
Well, that's it. Essentially, is to source your why. And that takes people some time. And, for each of us, it's different. And find your voice first, and don't squelch it, and be loud and proud. Embrace who you are. You don't need anybody's validation. If you think you're broken, I guarantee you are not. It's your imperfections and flaws that make us who we are. And those are actually the things we should celebrate, and use those to make your impact on the world in whatever way that is.
Yeah, definitely. We each have our own unique handprint. Nobody can do what you could do the way you could do it.
Well said. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, I love your message of hope.
Thank
Oh,
you.
this is great. Is there anything else that I should have asked you or that you want to say and we'll be done and be like, Lauren didn't ask me this? And we will have links to everything of yours and of course your books and where to find you.
I'm located in Northern California, and you can reach me if anybody wants to reach me. You can reach me via my website, which is stateofanxiety.com, just like it sounds. You can download a free chapter from the book at anxietyhacks.co. And my next book release will be a follow-up to the teen book, which is called the Teen Anxiety Guidebook, which will be out 4th of July of 2023. That is it.
Yeah. Okay. All of this will be listed with the episode and everything else. Thank you so much for being a guest today on 52 Weeks of Hope.
It was my honor. Thank you, Lauren.